presentation. Okay. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our next webinar dedicated to human wellness in a digital space. And the topic of this webinar is organizational behavior. We all went through all sorts of different digital transformation in the last few years. And the digital devices, the digital solutions, they just, become bigger, and we're having more and more type of, services that's actually digitalized. But there are lots of challenges that those devices and solutions bring to us and bring to our workflow. There are lots of security risks involved, organizational culture challenges, and the leadership question, how we're supposed to behave and deal with certain requirements, and actually decision-making approaches and frameworks, they've been changed due to the way we changed our communications. So the way we behave and organize our workflow in the last year has been changed so much. So I think that organizational behavior is a very, very important question nowadays. And I've been lucky, I found Robin Edelbroek, who are currently doing his Ph.D. That are dedicated to leadership, workflow, and actually in the digital space and virtual teams. And he will share today with us his findings and share with us his work. I would like to say one more thing about Robin. There are two different people in a business. Usually people in academia, they they know how things work, but barely make things happen in the practice. People who too much into business and very practical, they're able to make things done really, really fast, but they're not capable of explaining why those particular things happen. So I'm really, I value, and I hope you too, people who are able to have not just academical background, but practical business experience too. So Robin is actually the person who has both. He has broad academic background. He can explain things, and he's actually has some practical background too. So so please welcome Robin, and we will give him a chance to say to introduce himself to us. Okay, I will stop sharing. So Robin, here you go.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation for this webinar. Like you said before, my name is Robin. I'm doing a PhD in organizational behavior. It's a very broad topic, but I'll go more into depth later about what I'm actually interested in. And I work at a big tech company, in particularly the sales teams. So what I try to do is to combine my academic background with the practical background and sort of merge them together at some points. But so far it's been working really well for the last 4 years right now. So I hope at some point that I will be able to sort of get one particular job that combines both of them, but I haven't found it yet. My PhD is indeed in organizational behavior. To give a little bit of background, I'm interested in how innovation teams keep innovating over longer periods of time, even though that the context might change. It started with my master's thesis, and it sort of got out of hand because that became my first article. But I was very interested in companies being innovative and why one particular company was constantly bringing out new products and new solutions, and why other companies struggle with that. And I want to do that through the lens of organizational behavior. So what's the human side of innovative? What is innovative behavior in terms of coming up with a new idea, promoting that throughout the organization, and then hopefully and eventually realizing that or implementing it in the organizational structure. So I've been doing research for that for the past 4 years now. And yeah, so far it's been really, really challenging, really fun. COVID was kind of a surprise, so that sort of changed my my research around a little bit. I started focusing much on virtual teams. But yeah, I'm very happy and honored to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to our questions, because I mean, we prepared a few questions, so to bring some structure to our conversation. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go. The first question I'd like to discuss, probably we discussed a little bit before with Robin, and he has a lots of actually insights and knowledge about this area. So technology adoption challenges, what are the main one? Real versus digital interpersonal work-related interaction challenges. Okay, we bring a new technology to the company, to the organization. What are the main things we have to be aware to avoid, to embrace these challenges in the best way?
Okay, specifically in a digital environment compared to real. So one of the things that we, that's a very good question. One of the things that we found is that during certain parts of the implementation, or actually the rollout of a new product, different types of leadership is needed. So for instance, when you're in the ideation phase and people are much more creative, they need much more space rather than when you sort of funnel it down at some point right up until the moment that it gets implemented. I think the difference between real and digital, it really depends on the type of product that you're working on. So I do a lot of my work in a digital first company. So I work in big tech. So whenever something is rolled out, it's usually through digital means or a new software piece or whatever. Those type of innovations lend themselves much more for also a digital rollout rather than going through extensive physical testing, for instance, for a new product. So I think in terms of the interaction challenges, you need a lot more. When in a digital space, I would take that more into account in terms of organizing the structure around it, where people actually have the space of discussing with one another, shaping the idea a little bit better, maybe going through some tests or challenging the product, what you want to roll out. That maybe are a little bit more innate when you are working together in a physical space. And that was one of the things that we found out within one of the research studies that we did. So compared to real, I think you need to facilitate, leadership needs to facilitate a lot more and be aware of how people might feel and interact within a digital area or arena, rather than when they are on the floor and something happens much more naturally.
Okay, so basically you're meaning that in a digital space, it's a lot easier to implement some sort of tests and organizational structure. It's actually easier. So we're talking that there are a lot less actual risks involved when you work in a digital space, right? And you can shape actually the communication, so you have better control of the communication flow, right?
Yeah, and it's easier to test things directly with your consumers. So if you wanted to roll out a new product, for instance, you can do product testing fairly easy through digital means, because you can get direct feedback from the product rather than going through an entire process where you have to invite the customer in, see what happens, and the testing happens faster and easier. But I think from my perspective, when I look at people working together, the products even if you're working on a product that lends itself very much for a digital space, as a leader, I would still try to facilitate as much of the interaction as possible with my colleagues, because they are you have less overview of what is happening on the floor, for instance, and going through, like having multiple minds look at a particular product before it's actually rolled out. That's preferable, because that means that you have many people just looking at something, maybe to the same thing from a very different perspective. And in the context of my research, for instance, which was largely done during the COVID period, where there was no or not a lot of physical interaction anyway, leadership really had to step up and say, these are the most important things, and we need to be wary that we don't forget through going through all of those things that might have felt very basic in a normal testing phase, for instance.
Okay, sounds good. We have a few questions from the audience. We'll wait, because let's go through the question we prepared, and then we'll answer the question that attendees want you to ask. Okay, another question is, I know that your PhD is actually dedicated to leadership style, right? When we're talking about leadership style, because there is a certain question about what kind of skills we need, like to embrace the digital space a lot better, and what kind of behavioral type we have to embrace and force implement in our workspace that would work the best. So what is actually your finding? What did you find in terms of leadership style?
Yeah, so what we did is we tested empowering leadership compared to directive leadership. Empowering leadership in that sense is very much giving autonomy to your colleagues, giving more responsibilities, also helping them gain more skills over time as they are able to gather more experience through the autonomy that you grant them. Directive leadership is kind of the complete opposite, where you say this, like, I'm the one having the decision power, you centralize the decision power, and you decide, or one person decides what is important and what needs to be done. It's a lot more about issuing commands and giving reprimands when something is wrong. And it's really interesting to look at this during the COVID period, because every kind of leader, not everybody reacted the same way. So some of them actually embraced it by saying, this is a chance for people to step up. I want to give more responsibilities. I might not be not that present anymore right now, but this is a great opportunity to learn and to expand. Some actually felt the inclination to sort of tighten the leash a little bit and then go for directive leadership. And quite a few studies have been done about those leadership styles together. I think only a handful have done it over a longer period of time, so longitudinal. And what we wanted to look at, for instance, was what happens if you used one particular leadership style during the beginning of COVID or the other, and how does that foster or not innovation? And one of the things that we found was that empowering leadership on the long term had a much more powerful effect, not necessarily because they needed the support all the time or they needed to have that autonomy, but if they granted autonomy in the beginning, employees felt the freedom to explore and try and maybe even make more mistakes as well, which in the long run fostered a much more innovative culture, rather than saying, we're going to decide this is what you need to look at. You don't need to worry that much about exploring novel ideas or whatever. We're going to decide the KPIs and that's it.
That's great. So basically decentralization and giving people opportunity. So give people a chance to do things on their own.
Yeah.
Don't use that much. Don't try to control people that much as leaders used to do, right, before.
Yeah, it's well, it isn't like I'm going to step back and you just do what you want. It's more of I'm going to tell you what is important for the company. I'm also going to be transparent about why this is important for the organization. But by all means, also have some decision power of your own, and I'm here to help, for instance. And by doing that, you grant them much more opportunity to learn and to improve themselves over a longer period of time. And like innovation is is a process. Like there was, you need an idea to start. That idea needs to travel through different types of teams or organization or whatever. And they are, the more you grant that in the beginning, the more benefit you will have in the long term. And whereas directive leadership might have very strong results in the short term, because all of a sudden people don't need to worry about it anymore. And some may like it because it takes a lot of the ambiguity away. But if you're looking purely for innovative behavior, I would recommend empowering leadership. If it's more about a task performance or short term, then you might say, I want to go for my directive style. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but in a particular context of having an innovative culture and fostering innovation in your team, I would definitely go for a more empowering leadership style. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. So when we're talking about like measurements, like KPIs, how we actually can measure and evaluate behavior in a digital space. Organizational wise, I mean, we're talking about performance, team performance.
Yeah. So team performance, it really depends on the type of team. So the teams that I look at are, for instance, focused on bringing new products to the market. So part of their job is to be innovative, to come up with novel ideas, and that's it. If your team is much more performance focused, which I get, for instance, in the sales teams here, you might want to include different KPIs. So what I would do is I would focus like a study, for instance, take the core concept and work backwards from that. So let's say innovative behavior. I said, okay, what kind of leadership style is interesting for that? And I work backwards from what is important in order to be innovative, and what are important factors to take into account, for instance, the type of leadership style. One of the things that I would definitely recommend in a digital space is, if you're responsible for a group of employees, by all means, include a well-being KPI. So it's very easy to say, we can be super productive because we are working remotely and people can determine their own time and that kind of stuff. But it becomes more difficult as a leader to keep track of how your people are actually doing, how are they feeling. And one of the things I would, for instance, look at is social isolation. Look at how have regular check-ins on how their well-being is going and how they're self-rating themselves. So next to the actual output KPI that you want as a performance team, whether that's innovative behavior or innovative output or task performance or whatever, I would look at what helps to make my team grow and be better. And I think, especially in a digital space, when it's more difficult to have close interactions with one another, include a well-being KPI, either, one of the ones that I just mentioned.
So basically you're saying that the emotional state, the social activities actually influence a lot the outcomes, the innovation. They mentioned the
Absolutely
process. Okay, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. And so to give a bit of background, when I started doing my PhD, it was already a lot have been written about leadership, and a lot also about innovative behavior. It's purely the context that I look at that make it different. So for instance, I believe in the 90s, there was already a widely cited article that showed that the relationship between the leader and the employee is actually crucial to that employee's innovative behavior. So there has always been a social component. I think when you're working for prolonged periods of time, like what happened in COVID, it's good to include a well-being KPI because it's harder to keep track. I think if you're in a context of maybe hybrid work, that may be different. I think that if you have a healthy balance between remote work and being on location, I think you might want to include different kind of KPIs, but not everybody feels the same about remote work. Some people might withdraw, some people might be super happy because they have they don't have the feeling that they're watching them. So I think it's very dependent on the type of company that you work on. or where you work, and what their policies are on hybrid work, full remote work, that kind of stuff, because I think you should use different KPIs for all of them.
Great. We got a few questions from audience. We will answer them a little bit later. Let's finish with our first question, which we actually prepared. So
Sure.
next one.
Mm-hmm.
You remember you've been, when we had a conversation on the phone, you mentioned the flow, the process of the work is very important for the outcomes for innovative outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And can you please explain to us what actually does mean the concept flow in a digital space, and how to use this concept?
Okay, so flow is a concept that is very much related to well-being, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't refer to it doesn't necessarily refer to workflow. It refers to the concept of flow, which has a feeling of how much are you in, which denotes like how much are you involved in your work, how much and do you enjoy your work, how much do you feel absorbed in your work. And it's it doesn't necessarily is only applied to work. So I think the author of Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari, before he published Sapiens, he published an article about flow, but flow in combat situations. So for instance, soldiers that go through this process where they feel a heightened sense of productivity as they feel that all the moments are sort of seamlessly flowing into each other. That can also be applied at work. I have it, for instance, when I'm writing articles, like even when I had a very tough day at work, when I get into my flow during article writing, I can keep on going for hours, even without breaks, simply because I like what I like working on it. And once I like what I see and want to keep attributing that, it becomes sort of a feedback loop that keeps on going and going and going. The way that I mentioned flow earlier is because I took it as one of the core concepts of one particular study. So what we were interested in is how much does flow determine the innovativeness over longer periods of time if you are, for instance, in a lockdown. And what we found is that if leaders have the ability to heighten flow experiences within their workforce, individual flow experiences, in the long run, that has a very positive effect on innovative behavior, because that sense of absorption and intrinsic motivation and enjoyment in your work allows for the freedom in order to explore new ideas like in an innovative setting.
Okay. I think several participants have been asking questions, so lots of questions. I mean, I decided to address them a little bit later. So we will address them later. I will still keep my the whole idea, I mean, the framework we decided to walk in. Okay, the next question is, when I've been doing, honestly, when I've been reading articles about organizational behavior in digital space published in 2022, all of them mentioning behavioral visibility. For me, the whole idea of behavioral visibility was new, because I'm working in digital space. I'm using a lot of digital tools, but the whole concept challenges and paradox that this idea of behavioral visibility actually involved is actually more complicated than I thought. And can you please explain to us, and can you please tell us your perspective on the behavioral visibility and digital presence?
Yeah, so the concept of behavioral visibility, I remember that you sent it to me. The one that I used in my research was more about the sense of how much do you like, how much distance do you feel between your manager and you, or your teammate and you, when you are in a digital, when you're working digitally? Is this something like, does this have an overlap or?
Yes, it's exactly what, yes, just keep explaining.
Oh, okay, cool. So the way that behavior visibility played a role in my research is we wanted to feel like, we wanted to show, is there an effect of, or a moderation effect of communicating through digital means when you are in a prolonged period of working from home. In my particular research, it didn't it didn't show anything. It was not significant. So there's not too much I can tell about that particular study. One of the things that had a large influence is how close are colleagues already together? Like, do they have a history together? How easily do they work together in their physical space? And that also reflects in the digital space. Like, one of the things that I read about it was that it's an important factor to focus on in the beginning when you start working remotely, for instance, because that component of how close you feel to your to your colleagues and to your manager has an effect on how easy it is for you to communicate and actually start that conversation with that will lead to innovation in that sense. Sorry, this one like, I didn't have that much to tell about the closeness of people together. I think in a longer period of time, what I can tell you from my personal experience, because I started this particular role in a remotely, so I started working together with people, and in the beginning we actually found it difficult to come up with ideas with together, because nobody knew each other. We had no personal history, and it's only when we started having, like, investing in that relationship through, for instance, teamwork, also or team building sessions, then that's when we started to grow as a team. And it actually started to grow as a team so much that we actually became very familiar with one another, even to the point where we had to, when we got back to the RT, like return to office moment, people were sort of shocked at, like, meeting people that they felt super familiar with, but had a very different way of seeing. So, for instance, I had a colleague, his name was Mo. Like, I worked together with him on many projects already, but only throughout throughout the lockdowns. And one of the, like, at some point before we returned to office, like we went back to the office, he mentioned, yeah, but I'm way too tall for that particular seat in the plane. And I just obsessed for the rest of the day with how tall is Mo, because in my view, he wasn't that, like, he was very different than what I imagined. But it was strange to go through that experience and feel very close to someone without ever actually met him. And when I actually met him, we sort of had to start that process all over again, because I was essentially meeting a new person, in my view.
Yeah, so as understood, basically, if we're working in a digital space, in a virtual team, you still have to incorporate some sort of activities that would make people know each other. So basically, same HR activities, some engagement activities that will help people understand each other better and became more closer to each other, right? It's very important in a digital space also.
Indeed. That's what I tried to say. Sorry.
Yeah. I've been finding a lot of interesting things about, like, connectivity paradox and performance paradox. I mean, explaining discussing actually that researchers and scientists discussed in terms of, like, organizational behavior in digital space. And what it is all about, it's about that sometimes the things we think work in a particular way, they turned out to work in a different ways. And sometimes what we perceive in a digital, like the way we perceive it in a digital world and the way we perceive things, and actually giving different results, just because of maybe lack of certain, as you said, the lack of those close communication, lack of those engagement with each other. So yes, as you said, it's very important to implement, even in the virtual teams, some team building activities are very important, just to be sure that things will be done, better. So the question number 6 we already discussed. I mean, as you said, as you mentioned, you told the story about the person with whom you communicated for a long time, and then you actually saw the person in reality, and it turned out that the person looked absolutely in a different way, not what you expected. Can you please give us maybe examples, like when you're dealing with like business, like we're talking about not interpersonal relationship, not like interactions, communications, but we're talking about like business outcomes. Can it be that, for example, a business numbers, like digital numbers, tell one thing, but in reality, the reality can be different, actually, absolutely like different picture. Do you have like any examples, or have you had something like this in your experience?
I do. So my practical work consists a lot of presenting to people and consulting them on the best use of certain products. The numbers that were shown within the team was that we were hyper efficient during COVID, because we found out that we could do our work remotely. We got a lot of room for us to determine our time schedule. And I think everybody felt very, very productive after a while of working remotely like we did during the lockdowns. One of the things that I personally found was when I was presenting again in front of people is how much I missed physical cues. So I thought that I became much more productive in terms of my time management, and that was for sure. But I became much more productive in meetings when I was again working in the same environment as those people, because all of a sudden I reacted much more quickly to, for instance, their body language. And I felt like, oh, wait, maybe that point didn't come across as I wanted to. Or I could sense much more how well my presentation was going in terms of convincing them to do something. And I didn't know I relied that much on it in the beginning of COVID. Like I was primarily concerned with, I'm super productive right now because I have nobody talking to me at the coffee machine. And of course, I missed that after like 2 years, but I think the numbers in terms of task performance do not always reflect how well you're doing within the work itself. And that is something that we need to take into account, especially if you take your company completely remote. Another thing is that I just mentioned, like you need to work on the relationship with colleagues directly. We built a great team during COVID, but we interacted much less with other teams. So the personal relationships within my own team became very strong, but like within the wider company, it just didn't really work. And when we went back to a normal situation in actually collaborating with one another on the office floor, I had to all of a sudden introduce myself to a lot of other people with whom I believed that they were new, but I just never met them before, and they were already working there for one particular year. So if you make the choice of going completely digital, that might show on the one hand more productiveness on certain numbers in terms of time management. On other factors, for instance, innovative behavior, I think, because it draws a lot on the social aspect of how people are working together with one another. I think you might be overestimating the impact that you get from an immediate, hey, now I have a lot of now I can determine my own schedule, because sometimes those chats at the coffee machine are the sort of the birthplace of the best ideas. And it's kind of kicking an open door, but those kind of examples were the things that I found in my own work and in my own experience, and what I also heard from colleagues that were determining, like, okay, what kind of company do you want to be in the end? Like, do you want to be completely remote? Do you want to be hybrid. Not that I'm involved in any kind of the decisions in the company that I make, but we do we all have experiences with it. We have opinions for it, and some work better in one particular way than the other.
Okay, so it's it depends case by case. Yeah, but very good insight.
I think with every kind of question, it depends by case by case. I think what you need to it starts with what do you want to achieve as a company, and then also achieve as a team. And if that's innovative behavior, there are certain ways that you can elevate that behavior by, for instance, leadership styles, enhancing flow. I believe I saw a question coming up about HRM. My research is about HRM, so yeah, that's the reason why.
The question, we're almost done with the main question. We'll go.
Yeah, I know, but I saw something popping up from HRM. There are a lot of things that you can use, but it's really dependent on what you want to achieve as a company and what kind of value. That's it's understood. Okay, I found one very interesting research about the influence of constant connection. The whole idea. So, what is the research is about? So, when people constantly connected, they're constantly like 24 hours per day online. So, the research shows that people experiencing increased level of stress and lower job satisfaction when people have constant access and basically constant communication with the employees. Because what the problem with the digital space, I think, is that the way we connect, we can be in touch constantly. In office, you come to the office, you have a specific time, and you have your precious time at home, but not in case of digital, because digital come to your home and they can have access to you and contact to you any time of the day. Do you have anything to say? I mean, do you know any research done or anything about this particular subject matter? So the time of connectivity, the way of people, the availability of the people, and the stress level and job satisfaction. Yeah, I can imagine. I think there are a couple of things that are important there. So I think everybody, I think it's common knowledge that we're spending too much time online, and this thing has become increasingly evasive over the past couple of years. I think from a work perspective, the more you engage through those means, it's really depending on how they use them. So if you use that technology only to increase your own productivity levels in terms of communication and reaching out to people from a work perspective, I don't think that's wrong. I think that I do that in my work as well, and I feel great. I think when you start comparing yourself through content that is highly edited, highly specific, and obviously with a certain intent to be shown, you need to be careful with that, because that can actually create lower job satisfaction. I don't think there's necessarily a direct relationship with I spend more time on constantly connected. It's more about what's the type of info I'm consuming while being connected. And if I compare myself to LinkedIn, for instance, with my colleagues all the time, and I think, oh, that person is so much further than me, or so much this, when I present something, for instance, on social media, it's 99% of the times it's something positive because I want to share it. But it doesn't mean I only have positive days. It also means I can also have a very blue Monday. But if you constantly are dealing with sort of edited content, also work related, I think that in essence that can reduce the lower job satisfaction, because you're constantly comparing yourself to a snippet of somebody else's work life, and it doesn't say anything about how that person is feeling. So I was working in a different company before in consulting, which was a very high pressure environment, and the people that I looked up to in the end turned out to have a burnout. Well, when I was looking at them, I was thinking, wow, it's I wish I could manage it like this. But years later, almost everybody came up to me and said like I wasn't managing it at all, like I was just maybe better at acting. So it's not necessarily the direct relationship between connectivity. It's more about what are you connected to? Are you connected to a lot of things that help you, or are you connected to a lot of things that actually make you compare yourself to a very unrealistic version of yourself?
That's great. I mean, I love your answer. Okay. This question is a little bit about distortion of professional government organizations. There is lots of research done which says that a lot of digitalization that comes, it actually distracts the current situation with the established organization that brings lots of distortion to the classical way people perceive things work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very interesting and fascinating in terms of like just when you're dealing with some like very big corporations or healthcare organization, they always have established structure, right, or work, some sort of protocols. And any digitalization and the digital tools, employees usually perceive it as a like distraction. So do you have anything to say, but what is the best way to like avoid or somehow mitigate the idea of digitalization as distortion, distraction, because it's not this way. But the thing is how the best way to present and how to best organize things just to be sure that it's perceived in a more positive way, other than distortion and distraction.
Yeah, I think with any kind of digital like if you introduce any kind of digital means, the strongest thing you can do is focus on the benefit that it will have for the people that use it. So what happens a lot is that whenever you're introduced something digitally, it focuses a lot on the features, and it says like now we can do this, and now your job will change like this, and now we'll do this and this and this. And I think if you link it to somebody's ability to do their own job, I think that is the way to convince people or lower the resistance to it. Because I think sometimes we overestimate our own familiarity with the product that we're introducing, and we sort of underestimate what kind of impact it will have on people that might not completely understand it. So when I worked as a consultant and I was primarily focused on digital consultancy, the moment that I received resistance for anything that I was trying to implement, was because my narrative wasn't completely aligned with the people I was trying to convince. And when I showed to them, we're actually doing this to make your life better in the long run, that's when I started convincing people. So I introduced a new technology in a bank at some point. And for some reason, one particular process kept sort of evading me. So all of a sudden, nobody showed up in the call. My resources fell away. I wasn't allowed in certain documents anymore. And what I found out was that one particular manager believed that if my process was introduced, even though it was one of the most important processes in my particular project, and would help them tremendously in the long run, they believed that they would not get their bonus because their bonus was tied to a risk level. And when that process was introduced, the risk level would go up. So essentially, somebody was believing I was sort of stealing away their bonus, which was never my intention. I had no clue that it was happening, but I just came in and I said, this needs to happen. And I got a lot of resistance from that. But once I understood the other person's perspective, and I said, we're doing this in the long run, this probably won't affect you, but it will affect you if we don't do this, that's where it usually goes wrong. So I think resistance is more about the transparency of what you're trying to reach, rather than having people to pick up on a certain digital way of working. I think what COVID has taught us, one of the things that COVID has taught us, is that everybody is incredibly adaptable. And even people that I believed had didn't want to had anything to do with digital, now work digitally and are happy, and that's great. Like even in my own family, people watch YouTube more. Like so it's yeah, I think never underestimate somebody's ability to adapt, but you need to have the right narrative in order for them to start, I think.
Okay, great. Sounds right. Okay. Question from the attendees. The first one, how how does organizational behavior and business anthropology intersect or overlap both in terms of research and implementation? The question was from Charlie.
Okay. Let's see.
It's in the chat. How
Okay, cool.
does organizational
how does it
behavior
business
business anthropology
overlap in terms of research
it's
and
very academic. It's a very academic question.
Yeah, the thing is, in organizational behavior, I know a lot about business anthropology, a little bit less. I think intersect or overlapped in terms of research and implementation. I think that is something that still needs to, like, I haven't seen too many articles about it. So the stuff that I write about is very much focused on one particular part of organizational behavior. So organizational behavior and business anthropology are very broad concepts. I would have to look into it, to be honest. Maybe start defining what organizational behavior is and how it's evolving. The way that I approach organizational behavior is how are people experiencing and feeling in a business context. So it's not like business is more of a context in which I do research, but I approach it more from a work and psychology perspective. Other people do it the same context from a strategy perspective or from a finance perspective. I think I'm sure there are a lot of ways that they intersect, but I definitely would have to read upon it because yeah.
From my perspective, I believe that the main difference is the way you're gathering your data, because organizational behavior is more about up to date and more, you're using maybe a second type of source or direct source of information for evaluate your outcomes or like build some strategy. But business anthropology is more about retrospective. I mean, it's more about like past data and like basically utilizing some sort of skills and tools which have been learned in the past. And I think because the research is very depends on your objects of the research. You cannot it's very, very different, and you cannot in terms of intersect, I think the main difference is the way we're gathering data from my perspective. And in terms of like implementation, you can implement them both, and it depends on case by case, right? Sometimes you can use historical data. Sometimes you would prefer to use up-to-date data and not care about history that much. Because business anthropology is a very cool skill, but it's all about past. We live a little bit in a different world. And from my perspective, you have to be really fast in adopting, as you said. As you said, humans are really great in adoption, right?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that was one of the biggest struggles during my PhD, or still is gathering the right amount of data. So I'm very happy when I have data in that sense. I once had a proposal before the lockdowns where I would investigate what happened on a social perspective with people in a hackathon. The diversity would play a role in that, and also the output. And I had I saw many types of data being collected. I never finished that study because I just didn't have enough data. So I think in order to intersect organizational behavior and business anthropology, it would be very interesting, but I think you need to have a lot of time in order to gather the data that you want to, and then link that together. So one of the things that for instance, is a limit in my particular research is I take out, I don't consider that much output. I just consider innovative behavior, and I refer to studies that maybe have linked innovative behavior with innovative output. But I think this particular question is something that I would have loved to investigate at the beginning of my PhD, but maybe throughout the process. Right now, I'm just happy that I'll be able to finish it, and then maybe without time pressure, I'll be able to look at those kind of things.
Okay, another question is, again, Charlie was asking about the differences between human resources and organizational behavior.
Human resources, it's kind of an umbrella term. So organizational behavior looks at more from a work and psychology perspective. So I'm much more interested in how do people perceive certain things.
Mm-hmm.
HRM is a little bit more broader, I guess, because it looks also about what type of policies do we have, what type of instruments and processes do we have in place in order to help the workforce. So one of the studies that I worked on, we mentioned, for instance, we're looking at from an HRM perspective, but that HRM perspective comes from the variables leadership. I think with HRM, you're also looking more for like reward programs or policies or any kind of thing that has, for instance, to do with remote work, because leadership is a constant variable within all of the studies that I do for my PhD. I chose organizational behavior because it was more of I always focus on the behavior of employees and what kind of effects that they have and the experiences that they have and their perspective. But I think that's the best way that I could separate the two.
Okay. Let me read a comment from Joy, one of the attendees. He's saying that that's where most companies fail during COVID, no flaws or understanding of their brick and mortar flows, then had to guess and recreate what would have been good to document, to have documented prior, then just modify. How can we comment on, it wasn't a question. I think he was just, he was sharing his thoughts with us.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think
so it's
yeah, indeed, but I don't know exactly what I was saying during that particular minute. But yeah, I get like.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Yeah, no, that was just commenting to what you were talking about on process flows and
okay.
And I just was commenting to that. So
great. Now
we're just kind of kudos.
It wasn't necessarily a process flow. It was more flow as in the experience of employees. I think this definitely was one of the reasons why a lot of companies failed during COVID. I think their agility was definitely one of the things that would have been able to make them shift. The companies that I've spoken to and I've worked with, there was a clear definition there was a clear distinction in some of them that were able to quickly pivot and able to say, we're definitely going to do something different right now. Maybe not for always, but at least we're going to adapt. But it's highly dependent, not only on your processes, but also the amount of assets. Like if you, I work a lot with retail companies, pure online companies had a much easier time pivoting rather than ones with a lot of brick and mortar stores, simply because they had this weight of, I need to pay for that mortgage. And the companies that were able to, I think, let go of certain things where they said, this might sound great during pre-COVID times, but I need to survive right now. Those were the ones that thrived. But there were a lot of reasons why some of them worked out and some of them didn't.
Self-recognition was a huge one.
Yeah, I think when I started working at this company, they asked me, like, one of the first question that I got, for instance, was, can you give us more data about what's happening? And I was like, I have a lot of data, but not about COVID, because I've never experienced this before either. So we just need to play it by ear. And what I did with most of the companies that were in my particular portfolio, we had regular check-ins about what do we see, how do we fix this, how do we change it. Now, by no means I have any kind of ability to convince a company, for instance, to let go of a certain business area or to change something completely. But if I look at all of the companies that I've worked with, the ones that were proactive in reaching out to me and saying, just give us a little bit more context, and then we will decide in our company what to change. Those were the ones that usually thrived or at least survived.
Joy, I used to it's always good to see, positive outcome, positive, body movements. Thank you so much for your question, Joy. Okay, we're done. It's 12:25. I think it was, I think it was very interesting. Thank you so much for being with us, Robin. And
for inviting me. I hope it was interesting.
hope to see you soon again. Okay, so I'm finishing the recording. Thank you so much, everyone.